excellent writer, easy and clear and to understand when you're reading. But what impresses me most about the way that Dr. Reed presents his materials is that he focuses on what I think matters the most, and that is the moral components of a free economy and individual liberty. So before I bring him up, let me just go through a couple of things on his bio and his work history. So he served as the president of the Foundation for Economic Education since 2008. Prior to that, he helped to found the Mackinac Center for Public Policy out of Midland, Michigan, where he served as the president for 20 years. He was also a professor at Northwood University, my alma mater, so I'm a little partial to that part of his bio. And he's authored over 1,000 articles, both have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the Christian Science Monitor, USA Today, and the Freeman Magazine. He has a master's degree in history from Slippery Rock University and a bachelor's degree in economics from Grove City College, an honorary doctorate from both Northwood University and Central Michigan University. Would you please help me welcome Sir Lawrence Reed.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me all right in all parts of the room? Okay. I always like to ask an audience that for a couple of reasons. One, I might be too soft-spoken, or you could be hard of hearing. And that gives me the opportunity to tell you a little story that I heard not so long ago that I thought was rather funny, about a man who was in his, I think, 90s, who went to see his doctor about his wife's hearing problems. He wanted to see if he could get some advice. And the doctor told him, well, you need to do a test. You need to go back home and stand back of her a ways and say something, and if she doesn't hear you, then get a little closer. And keep doing that until you get to the point where she can hear you, and then come back and tell me the results, and we'll see what I might advise. So he goes home thinking he might have this problem on the way to resolution, and he gets home and he sees his wife off at the stove, and from about 20 feet behind her, he says, "Honey, what's for supper?" And no response. So he moves to 15 feet behind her and says, "Honey, what's for supper?" Still no answer. Now 10 feet behind her. "Honey, what's for supper?" Doesn't even turn around. Now 5 feet behind her, he says, "Honey, what's for supper?" At which point she turns around and says, "For the 4th time, it's lasagna." Well, this is my first visit back to Milwaukee, I think, since Wisconsin became a right-to-work state. So that makes being here with you especially sweet. We were talking a bit at our table about the long struggle in my former state, where I lived for 30 years before moving to Georgia in Michigan to make that state a right-to-work state. And I remember in the early days when we started on that, in the late 80s, anytime we mentioned that that was our goal, we'd hear things like, "Oh, well, good luck on that," or "That'll never happen," or "Why are you trying that here? Would there be an easier place to make that happen?" Well, here we are today. Michigan's a right-to-work state, Wisconsin is, Indiana is, and now half the states of the union are. And I think momentum is all in the right direction on that issue. I'm also pleased to be here because, as Aaron pointed out, there is a long-standing, deep connection between the Foundation for Economic Education and people in the Milwaukee area. Bill Law, Sr., was chairman of our board back in the early 80s. I know him well and thought he was one of the most incredible guys I ever met. A gentleman of the first order and a true believer. And some of you, I understand, may even be from Norman Ream's church. Norm and Muriel Ream have both passed on recently, but in recent years. But they were great advocates for liberty, and their son, Roger Ream, is president of the Fund for American Studies and also chairman of our board. So that's just a few of the connections. There are many others, so I'm always thrilled to be back here. I want to talk to you tonight about some real heroes. I believe that's the title we gave the talk, right? Is that what we advertised? Real heroes. Today at the Brookfield Academy, a place I love and have visited probably 4 or 5 times, we talked about people who could also be regarded as real heroes. But I'm going to tell some different stories tonight for the benefit of the Brookfield students who heard those stories today. But there's one similarity, and that is that all the people I want to tell you about tonight are heroes because they were people, men and women, of character. And although character is not the primary subject tonight, I do want to say that that is of extraordinary importance to us at FEE. It infuses all of our programs now, even though our name would suggest, and many of you would say our history would suggest as well, that our primary focus would tend to be things like the growth of government and taxes and private property and what have you. Those are as important to us as ever. But we also believe that if we don't fix the character problem in this country, almost nothing else is going to matter. That all of these other things that occupy so much of our attention, whether it be the $19 trillion national debt or runaway government, explosion in regulations, higher taxes, the march of socialist philosophy and so forth. All of those things, as important as they are reflections of character or the lack thereof. People who lack character do the kinds of things that we are afflicted with today. People who lack character or don't put a premium on it end up bestowing upon their country things like out-of-control debt, out-of-control spending, dependency, and all the awful things that come with those things. So we really have, at FEE, begun to make sure that this message is included in everything we do. Because if we don't fix the character problem, we're not going to fix anything else. I remember hearing a few years ago Senator Harry Reid, not a man of great character, from Nevada, attacking Republicans on the floor of the Senate because they were raising questions about the annual subsidy for the Cowboy Poetry Festival in Nevada. And this would have been about 2009 or 10 when we had a deficit in the 1 year's budget that still exceeded $1 trillion. And Harry Reid was up there talking about how these insensitive Republicans wanted to do away with subsidies for the Nevada Cowboy Poetry Festival. I saw that as much more than just bad economics. It's evidence of lousy character. When somebody can say, I have no problem in sending the bill to the next generation, even though we're already doing that to the tune of $19 trillion, for a poetry festival in Nevada, that tells me that we've got something more serious on our hands than just bad economics. We've got some real character issues. The people I want to talk to you about tonight, though, were all men and women of enormous character. I'm going to choose 3 from the 19th century and 3 from the 20th, unless I get carried away and don't get to cover them all, but that's the plan at the moment. Let's start with the 19th century. Barely 100 years ago, the first person I want to tell you about was still alive. She died in 1915, in February of that year, at the age of 95. She was born in 1820, lived to 1915. She was, at the time of her death, regarded by millions of Americans as perhaps the most admirable woman in recent American history. She would, if there had been polls at the time of who do you admire the most, I'm sure, at least among American women, she would have been at or near the top of the list. Everybody knew who she was. She was widely regarded as a saint, and yet today, barely a century since she passed away, few Americans even know her name. Her name was Fanny Crosby. Anyone ever heard that name before? Anyone know who Fanny Crosby was? Fanny Crosby, one of the most extraordinary women in American history. Let me tell you several things about her, but keep the most important thing regarding Fanny Crosby for the last. Fanny Crosby, in the 1870s, caught a lot of national attention for her work during the cholera epidemic in New York City. At a time when thousands of New York City residents were fleeing the city to avoid getting cholera, Fanny Crosby was one of those who stayed behind and nursed and ministered to the sick, contracted cholera herself, but she was one of the lucky ones